So here we have this situation where John Jones is taking on Stipe Miocic coming up in New York on November 11th. And then a couple of weeks prior to that, you're going to have Francis Ngannou box Tyson Fury in Saudi Arabia. While we know for a simple fact that Francis Ngannou is the undisputed lineal heavyweight champion of the UFC, but yet here you have John Jones first taking on Cyril Gane, defeating him in the first round, a guy that took Francis to the limit in terms of going to an entire decision, okay? And then now you're going to put him up against Stipe Miocic, by the way, a guy who in his recent fight got knocked out by Francis Ngannou to win the heavyweight championship of the world. But in order for the UFC to save face, they can also say, well, Stipe also schooled him, so they're 1-1. So this makes this matchup sort of intriguing in a certain type of way where they want to solidify John Jones as the best heavyweight in the world without having to get Francis to sign a fight and fight for their organization due to the contract disputes that they had going on. But nonetheless, here we are with John Jones taking on Stipe Miocic, and there's a possibility that this could be the last fight for both men. Now, with that in mind, you got to think to yourself, where does the heavyweight division go after this? And what does the heavyweight division in the UFC even mean at this particular point in time? Because the reality is that Francis Ngannou is not going to ever fight for the UFC, at least not for a very long time, especially with a contract that he has going on with the Saudis of him boxing Tyson Fury and maybe even potentially boxing other boxing figures if he were to win this matchup and maybe even create a good account of himself. And then on top of that, he's signed to the PFL to where they gave him a very great deal that is undeniable to any athlete out there that has certain requests from their promotions, whether that would be healthcare or whether that would be executive rights to, let's say, having PFL Africa as a launching pad for, let's say, people that you want to put on in that particular region of the world. So it's very hard for Francis to ever go back to the UFC unless, of course, the UFC goes out there and tries to, let's say, co-promote with PFL. Now, is that ever going to happen? Probably not. Ask Fedor how that worked out. Never happened. Fedor ran M1 Global, a Russian mixed martial arts organization and league that, by the way, has produced the likes of Islam Makhachev and Khabib Nurmagomedov prior to the UFC. So a very regional powerhouse in the region of Russia and elsewhere within that particular circumference of Ukraine, Kazakhstan, so on and so forth. Fedor was a big promoter of that promotion. So he tried to put them on as a co-promoter when they tried to make the Brock Lesnar fight. The UFC said not going to happen. So the UFC is at a position right now where they are the ultimate A-side when it comes to promotions, when it comes to their pay-per-view power, and it comes to their worldwide reach and their audience that they have already built in over the years, and then the casual new audience that's coming into the fold. Well, now you have John Jones taking on Stipe in New York, where they are charging literally $20,000 for you and your family to watch the entire fight, and that would be the entire total, which means that one seat could cost $5,000. The second seat may cost $7,000. So by the end of it, you're looking at 20 grand that you're spending to watch the possibility of John Jones and Stipe Miocic retiring and possibly fading off into the sunset, as they say. Well, now let's talk kicks and punches for this particular fight. I honestly don't think that this fight is, it's not as dominant as people think it is. And people need to understand that. You see, the way Jon Jones is marketed, it is as if he is unstoppable. And we've seen that he has flaws. He's had mishaps. He's had bad moments. He's had a challenging competition in the octagon with the likes of Dominic Reyes and Alexander Gustafsson. You can even add Thiago Santos into that list. You can add Daniel Cormier into that list. Even Ovince St. Preux. So guys that sometimes Jon Jones should not look really bad in. Sometimes he looks human in some of these matchups that I had just mentioned. With OSP, with Thiago Santos, even with maybe Daniel Cormier, although one can argue that he dominated the wrestling in that department. He got beat up by Alexander Gustafsson in their first fight. Of course, only for him to come back and avenge the second time around and finish him off of his back in the TKO ground and pound. Now, the reason why I say this fight is a lot closer than people think is because, number one, you got to think that Jon Jones is taking on somebody that has great wrestling, right? Not only does he have great wrestling, he's got good enough boxing to where he has finished off DC. DC has finished him off. But then every time he gets finished off, guess what happens? He comes back and learns from those mistakes and comes back as a better fighter. And this is Stipe Miocic I'm talking about. So what are you going to get out of Stipe Miocic in this particular fight? I think what you're going to get is a much more improved version than himself back in 2021 when he lost the title to Francis Ngannou, which, by the way, took place in the Apex Center in front of no one. So I'm going to take a look at some of their records here. So before Stipe Miocic lost to Francis Ngannou, his last 3 fights prior to that was with Daniel Cormier. All 3 of them. Check this out, right? So basically, the last fights, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The last 5 fights from Stipe Miocic was from Francis Ngannou and Daniel Cormier. Now, would you say this is top-level competition? 1,000%. This is top-level competition. Because when he took on Daniel Cormier the first time, Daniel Cormier was on form. He knocked him out in the first round, okay, in July of 2018. Okay, that was the summer just right before they had the Khabib versus Conor McGregor fight, which, by the way, is coming up as an anniversary tomorrow. So then you have, after that, Daniel Cormier. He goes and ends up finishing him off in the 4th round of their rematch. And then they get another rematch again, and he beats Daniel Cormier for a unanimous decision where Daniel Cormier gave a better account of himself that time. But nonetheless, afterwards, Stipe came back, defended his title against Francis, a guy who he's already beaten back in 2018, in early 2018, where he was preparing for it, obviously in late 2017. But yeah, that's the only competition that he's had. So top-level competition, probably the top 3, top 2 greatest heavyweights of all time in the UFC, Stipe has took on. And again, he came back after getting knocked out by Daniel Cormier in 2018 to knock out Daniel Cormier in the later championship rounds in the 4th round. So that showed that he was very much improved. And then in the pandemic era, UFC 252, he goes in there, wins a unanimous decision towards Daniel Cormier, looking even better. Now, Stipe looks very plotty in the way that he fights. He doesn't have a very good footwork. He doesn't really move around a lot. Very labored in the way that he moves. And so I'm going to be very curious to see how John Jones is going to compete with somebody like that, especially where you see John very elusive in his 205 days. Not only is he elusive, he's very loose. He's got this not a care in the world attitude in the way that he fights, in the way that you saw him open up with a flying knee against Shogun Rua. Now, how amazing is that? For him to pull off something like that, just fearlessness, bravery, courageousness, for him to try out a movement like that. But in order to do that, and in order to be confident in actually even having the thought of process to do that, you have to be explosive. And I have yet to see that with John within the heavyweight division against Ciryl Gane. Now, in the opening fight of Ciryl Gane and John Jones, you didn't really get much out of it because you didn't see what John would do in the striking aspect of things. What you saw John was do exactly what he did to Chael Sonnen, take him down and get him to the ground, or either ground and pound him off or submit him, which is, by the way, is what Khamzat is really great at doing. He takes you down, he'll either submit you or just pound you out until he gets the finish, or just knocks you out completely with a ground and pound shot. That's John Jones in a nutshell. Also with the elbows that he comes with, it's just absolutely devastating, especially if you get caught with it on the ground. Now, here's a question. In order for us to see that, does Stipe have enough takedown defense for him to stuff John Jones's takedowns and for this to be contested on the feet? And if this was to be contested on the feet, who is faster between the two? And unfortunately, this is the mystery, because I can't go off of John Jones, the light heavyweight, because these are two completely different animals. I mean, we're talking about two guys with two different body types. The body type of John Jones as a lean 205er with six-pack abs and having the right shape, looking like an athlete, a lean athlete at that, as opposed to a 6'4", over 250-pound heavyweight as what he is now, right? And how that perhaps maybe will change his striking prowess and how he's going to approach his punches, his kicks, whether it's going to be fast enough or whether it's going to be the same type of torque and explosiveness that he had in the 205 division. This is the mystery. But as far as the wrestling goes, I think it's safe to say that these guys can be in a very even position with their wrestling. And what do I mean by that? Meaning that the most wrestling you could probably see out of this fight will more than likely be contested within the clinch, the upper clinch positions. In other words, i.e. Greco-Roman style. Now, for those that don't understand, Greco-Roman emphasizes a lot on top clinches, not so much of the single or double leg takedowns that you would get out of folk style or freestyle wrestling, but Greco-Roman really emphasizes a lot on body locks, on clinches from head positions, grabbing the necks or wrist control, and then going back to hip tosses and things of that nature. So it's a very close range type of fight, and I think that this is where the 50-50 grappling exchange is going to happen with John Jones and Stipe Miocic. I really believe that because, again, they both have very good takedown defense. It takes a very elite athlete to take any of them down, but I tell you what, the way that John Jones performed the first time against Daniel Cormier, you can't deny John Jones of his wrestling prowess, meaning that he definitely has a great chance of taking Stipe down. Now, will he do it often? And when he does it, will he keep him there the way that he has kept Ciryl Gane in that position? My answer is no. It's going to be a much tougher resistance. It's going to be a much tougher fight in the clinch positions. And the mystery here is the striking. Because if we're just going to go off of John Jones as the 205er, then we're not really giving justice to the effect that becoming a heavyweight has on John Jones's body. Because you look at the strength routines that John Jones has done in order for him to get to that weight class. The thing is, this is really where we're going to find out if that particular training and that weight training really comes in handy when fighting a real proper heavyweight that can wrestle and has significant knockout power like Stipe Miocic. This is where we can really find out if all of this makes sense. Because in my opinion, and I'm going to give you my opinion on strength training and performance training and things of that nature, I truly believe that what John Jones is doing is inconducive to the heavyweight division. Because if you're already the baddest man in the world as a 205er, then fight as a 205er and fight as a heavyweight no more than 220, or maybe even as light as 210 if you can go that low. Look at Deontay Wilder. The guy is 6'6". He came in a fight against Tyson Fury at 208 pounds. Okay, there's a lot of guys out there that are over 200 pounds but are not 6'7", and here comes skinny Deontay Wilder boxing Tyson Fury. He felt he didn't really need to gain that much weight. He felt that he already had the knockout power. But here's the problem. Maybe John needs to armor his body up in order for him to feel secure in taking on a lot of guys in the heavyweight division that have knockout power, like Sergey Pavlovich. Could you imagine maybe this type of body style is conducive for him to fight somebody like that? Somebody who has a very sloppy striking but has knockout power. Okay, somebody that John Jones can probably contest against when it comes to the wrestling aspect of things. But once again, this is all a mystery with Stipe Miocic. The wrestling is a mystery because we know Stipe has the capabilities to out-wrestle anybody in the world. But then again, the other catch-22 and a double-edged sword of that is there are a lot of moments where Stipe does out-wrestle or get out-wrestled in nights where he's just not really on. It happens. It happens. So he's a very 50-50 fighter when it comes to the wrestling, right? It's not like Kamaru Usman where nobody has ever been able to take him down other than Colby, which was controversial in and of itself, nor maybe Leon Edwards was the first guy to take him down. A guy who's not a wrestler. Out of all people, it was controversial for Colby Covington to, quote-unquote, even take him down in the second fight. But somebody who's a non-wrestler was able to take down Kamaru Usman, who's never been taken down in his entire UFC career. Officially speaking, that is. So it shows you that having this great wrestling pedigree isn't always what it's cracked up to be. And by the way, John could have gone on to the Olympics and wrestled for America if, let's say, he didn't have to jump in his pro career straight away because he had to make money to provide for his family because he had a kid a little bit too early than what he had expected with his fiance. So he jumped right into the pros, started fighting, stopped wrestling as a result of that. But once again, this is one of those situations where sometimes maybe wrestling pedigree doesn't really matter, does it? But this is John Jones we're talking about, the guy who took down the great Olympian Daniel Cormier. So remember, I mentioned how you can try to understand this fight with Strickland and Adesanya was through Alex Pereira. Well, if you want to try to understand John Jones versus Stipe Miocic, Daniel Cormier is the guy to basically use as the measuring stick into understanding the MMA math of this equation. But again, that's the beauty of this sport, is that MMA math almost doesn't matter. It really doesn't, because on any given night. Anything can happen. And you look at the fights that Stipe Miocic has had, it's literally a 50-50 aspect with the top two best fighters in the world. Let's take a look at this, right? So, how did he win the UFC Heavyweight Championship back in 2016, knocking out Fabricio Verdum? Before that, he beat Andre Arlovski, who was on a red-hot streak at the time, and then got a title shot against Fabricio Verdum, took on Alistair Overeem, that same card where CM Punk had fought Mickey Gall, and then took on Junior Dos Santos, 2017, knocked him out. And then Francis Ngannou, this big bad heavyweight that everybody was marketing as this guy that can hit harder than a Ford Escort. Back in 2017, he beats him and then is just top-level competition from there with 3 fights straight with Daniel Cormier. 2018, 2019, and 2020, all fights with Daniel Cormier. And then as the world heavyweight champion, gets knocked out by Francis Ngannou. And then Francis Ngannou goes on to defend his title against Cyril Gane. And Cyril Gane is the same guy that John Jones won the vacant title from. So that's how all of these things connect. And in order to understand how each of these fights are going to go, yeah, we have to take a look at these guys that they've fought and the mutual parties involved to try to kind of solve what we're going to see. But once again, these factors that I've mentioned, you just really don't know. You don't know how the fight is going to go because there's just so many variables that come into play. This is why I think a lot of prediction shows, a lot of MMA pundits and analysts are going off of statistics. They're going off of what they know in terms of the person's fight history. And sometimes that doesn't always tell the entire tale of the tape. Sometimes you got to delve a little bit deeper into the psychology of these men. You got to delve into what it is that makes them tick, what it is that motivates them, but also taking a look at some of the outside factors that are going on in their personal life. For example, you have John Jones, who has brothers in the NFL. One is now retired, a former Super Bowl champion. Now he has Chandler Jones, who plays for the not the LA Raiders. They used to be LA Raiders, but now the Las Vegas Raiders. Interestingly enough, home of the UFC, so his brother plays in the same city that the UFC is the headquarters of. And he has these little bit of mental health breakdowns going on to where he was saying all these crazy things about Aaron Hernandez. Oh, Aaron Hernandez was set up, or all these crazy conspiracies. So then they basically went and gave him a 51-50 situation where they branded him crazy, and then he got kicked off of the team. Now, I don't know how much this is going to affect John Jones, but you would imagine a guy who is very close to his family, by the way, an extremely athletic family, a family that has probably helped them along the way when it comes to, let's say, training, and then maybe even financial means when he had some trouble not being able to fight all these different years where he had all these court litigations and whatnot. You got to understand, yes, that is a factor to how it can affect John Jones. Now, what about Stipe Miocic? We don't really see this guy in any scandalous situations. In fact, he is a complete opposite. He's a good guy. He's a firefighter. He serves his community. But then you got to understand, being a firefighter, you're sleep deprived in ways that the normal civilian population is not. And in particular, a way that a professional athlete who has a regiment of waking up every morning and training, and now John Jones having all of that in his back pocket, being that he is way more disciplined than he ever was, even in his prime, has to tell you that you are dealing with somebody who is hyper-focused. Now, what about Stipe Miocic? How is his job as a firefighter affecting him? The constant cortisol levels that you have to pump up in your body whenever you have to go to these adrenaline calls and these emergencies and these firefights that you have to get in because somebody's house burnt down. Or working as an EMT and then having to transfer somebody from a gurney to the hospital, and then the trauma that you have to deal with that while going into a fight camp. And by the way, one of the greatest champions of all time in the UFC. I'm talking about John Jones. That's who you're going to go against with while you're dealing with all of this in your second career. And here's the thing. One thing you guys got to understand, right? I'll tell you a story about this kid that I trained with, even as far back as when he was in high school. His name is Angelo Trevino. He was one of the top prospects that was coming out of Team Alpha Male. I urge you guys to go and follow him. Real stud of a kid, right? Absolute great fighter. I've trained with him over the years, was one of the best training partners that I've ever had. I love the challenges that he presented every time that we grappled. I love the exchanges that we had in terms of the knowledge that we shared. And then on top of that, the high-level prowess and experience that he's had as a pancration fighter, which is basically MMA, but just punching down low into the stomach rather than the head, and then everything else is just full straight on grappling and kickboxing. So he has that experience, and somewhere down the line, his career started to take a little bit of a halt. And Uriah Faber mentioned something to the effect of, well, a lot of people have been getting into Angelo Trevino's head. They said something to the effect where he's letting people tell him, oh, he has to go out there and get a job or this and that. Here's something you got to understand as a professional fighter. You can't have a second job. You have to make your job 100% what it is that you do on a daily basis with your training, with your recovery, with your sleep, with your patterns of training regiments on a daily basis, how you're going to plan it, how you're going to coordinate with your nutritionists as they coordinate with your jiu-jitsu coach, your main coach, your kickboxing coach, and then on top of that, how you're going to deal with people that are going to be your cut man, and so on and so forth. Obviously, they provide you with a cut man in the MMA promotions, whereas with boxing, you have to come in and provide your own cut man, but that's neither here or there. So these are all the things that are in the favor of John Jones as opposed to Stipe Miocic, right? But then you look at Angelo Trevino, he is doing the exact same thing that Stipe Miocic is doing right now. Now, when Stipe got knocked out by Francis Ngannou, you got to think to yourself, what was he doing leading up to that particular fight? Was Stipe Miocic working long hours in a firehouse? More than likely, because, again, he loves what he does. And again, they say that if you love what you do, you never have to work a day in your life, right? So in other words, if you love what you do, very few times you're going to have high cortisol levels in what it is that you do. For example, I love doing these videos, right? Does it stress me out when I do these videos? Probably not one bit, because I enjoy them. It doesn't give me this high cortisol burden of any kind. So maybe Stipe Miocic approaches his his firefighting career as that, as something that, well, this is what I love to do. I love being out there. I love rescuing cats from trees, because whether you like it or not, that is one of the things that the fire departments do. They love to save people that, let's say, they have to give CPR to, or some guys that are, out on a drunk night in Cleveland, they're passing out, dying from alcohol poisoning, and then they go out and save them, or something to that effect, helping a pregnant lady, right? You could imagine somebody that is motivated to get into this career would probably really not look at this as a burden at all. Or is it? But then you never know. That's why, again, you have to take all of these factors into consideration, right? So back to Angelo Trevino, the way that Uriah said, and the way that he marketed this kid, the way that he praised this kid, he was going to be one of the best fighters out there, especially in the 170 division. The only problem was he just didn't put in the time that you needed to be a fighter. According to Uriah, this is not my saying, right? Because here's the thing, if you have a job while you're fighting, it's going to be very difficult for you to rise up. This is why a lot of guys become journeymen. A lot of guys become journeymen to guys that have all the resources and all the marketing in the world, and that is the literal exploitation of the fight game in its purest form. And that's just the way that you got to understand it. So the way that maybe the UFC is looking at this, and I'm only speculating for entertainment purposes, because there are times that I will speculate for entertainment purposes, but then most times I'm going to give you the real news. But the way that I speculate this is that the UFC is looking at Jon Jones as the heavy favorite based on these factors alone. Based on the factors that, like, well, Stipe has all of this going on. He has 1 foot here and then 1 foot in the firefighting world, and then he has 1 foot in the door as a fighter, and then not really, and then he decides when he wants to fight, and then he waits it out, and then you wonder if he's really putting all the training into this, the type of training that you need to be at the highest level. And sometimes in order to do that, you have to literally cut off everything. So is Stipe doing that? We don't know. We don't know a lot of what's going on. What we do know, there are a few people out there that are giving rumors about Stipe Miocic putting up a lot of weight, making himself a lot bigger for this fight in order for him to maybe perhaps play the strength advantage over Jon Jones. Because after all, the high technicality that we know Jon Jones to be, this is the only thing that you can really offer this guy is strength, which, by the way, is something that we really would have been interested to see in how he would deal with the type of test such as Francis Ngannou. But we never know at this point. So how I see this fight going, I'm not going to be surprised if Jon Jones gets a decision or a late stoppage. I don't see him finishing Stipe Miocic early on the way that he did against Cyril Gane or against Chael Sonnen or all the other dominating fights that he's had in his resume. I don't see that at all. What I see is Jon really taking his time against a Stipe that is not only hyper experienced, but is also very well prepared, as I wish he would be, or how I would speculate him to be going into a fight in the magnitude of a Jon Jones card. Or maybe he's just doing it nonchalantly, once again, putting 1 foot in the door of being a firefighter and putting 1 foot in the door of being a professional fighter, which, as I told you, with many stories of different fighters in the past that have had great potential, this is one of their downfalls, was they just, you can't do it all. You can't. I think that we're seeing a lot of great examples of that right now. Conor McGregor is a great example of that people always reference as the guy that is falling off because of this great status that he had in 2016, and only for him to fall this far as an alcoholic, as somebody that doesn't seem to really be that motivated into his fight career. Is that what Stipe Miocic is? Write on the comments below if that's what you guys think. Is Jon Jones going to win this fight? Write on the comments below and tell me what you think. Will Jon Jones look like the old Jon Jones in the striking department, even though he's got all this weight put on him and all this new extra muscle and armor? Write on the comments below if you agree with that. Do you guys think that Stipe Miocic having a firefighter career and then having a career as a professional fighter at the highest level and at the professional level at that, professional championship level at that, is that conducive, especially to probably the hardest fight that he's ever going to have in his entire career while coming off of a knockout loss? Only time will tell. That's why. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me know what you guys think. And I'll see you guys on the next one when we enjoy the fight.